He bought a cabin for 20 cents in broad daylight at a public auction where grown men with money in their pockets stood silent, watching him bid on what should have been the deal of a lifetime. But what Marcus Rivera didn't know was that he'd just purchased his own death warrant, and the most dangerous secret in the entire territory. Marcus Rivera looked around the small crowd gathered outside the weathered courthouse, expecting someone, anyone, to challenge his bid. The auctioneer's gavel hung in the air, waiting. The cabin sat on 12 acres of good land with a well and a corral that could easily hold 20 head of cattle. The roof needed work, sure, but 20 cents. The silence stretched longer than it should have. "Going once?" the auctioneer called, his voice lacking its usual enthusiasm. Marcus noticed something else strange. The people weren't looking at the cabin. They were looking at him, not with envy or frustration, but with something that made his skin crawl. Pity, as if he'd just signed his own death warrant instead of making a smart purchase. "Going twice." An older woman named Elena Martinez stepped closer to him, her weathered hands twisted around her shawl. She leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't want that place, son. Trust me on this." But before Marcus could ask why, the gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo louder than it should have. "Sold to the gentleman in the brown coat for 20 cents. The crowd began to disperse immediately, faster than normal, as if they couldn't get away quick enough. But as Marcus approached the auctioneer to complete his purchase, he caught fragments of hushed conversations drifting on the wind. I should have told him. Nobody's been inside for 15 years. What happened to the last man who tried? The auctioneer handed him the deed with shaking hands, avoiding eye contact. When Marcus asked about the property's history, the man simply shook his head and walked away without another word. That's when Marcus noticed the most unsettling detail of all. Every single person who had attended the auction was now watching him from a distance, but none of them were moving toward their horses or wagons to leave. They were waiting to see what he would do next, as if they expected something to happen, something that had happened before. The ride to the cabin felt longer than it should have. Every step his horse took seemed to echo with the weight of those watching eyes from the auction. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a terrible mistake. But 20 cents for 12 acres of land was still 20 cents for 12 acres of land. The property sat at the end of a winding dirt path surrounded by tall grass that hadn't been cut in years. The cabin itself was smaller than he'd expected, a single room with a stone chimney and windows so thick with grime they looked black from the outside. But the bones were good. The logs were solid, the foundation sturdy. Marcus tied his horse to a post and approached the front door. The handle turned easily, too easily, as if someone had been keeping it oiled despite the apparent abandonment. Inside, dust particles danced in the afternoon light streaming through cracks in the shuttered windows. The air smelled stale, but not rotten, not like a place that had been truly empty for 15 years. His boots creaked against the wooden floor as he moved deeper into the room. A simple table sat against one wall. 2 chairs tucked neatly beneath it. A stone fireplace dominated the opposite wall, cold ashes still piled in the grate. Above the mantel, a rectangular patch of clean wood suggested something had hung there recently, a painting or mirror that someone had bothered to remove. But it was the floor that caught his attention. In the center of the room, the wooden planks were arranged differently than the rest. Not damaged, not rotted, but deliberately cut and fitted to create what looked like a perfect square, as if someone had once built a trapdoor, then sealed it permanently shut. Marcus knelt and ran his fingers along the edges. The seams were tight, filled with some kind of dark substance that had hardened over time. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to ensure this section of floor would never be opened again. A shadow passed across the window. He looked up to see a figure on horseback watching him from the tree line. Even at this distance, Marcus could tell the rider was deliberately staying hidden, using the trees for cover. When their eyes met through the grimy glass, the figure immediately turned and rode away, but not before Marcus caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. The rider wore a distinctive wide-brimmed hat with a silver band, the same hat he'd seen on one of the men at the auction, one of the men who'd watched him buy this place with that strange expression of pity. Someone was keeping watch on the cabin, had been watching it probably for years. The question was, why? What lay beneath those sealed floorboards that was worth guarding? And more importantly, what would happen now that someone had finally bought the place and discovered their secret? Outside, he could hear hoofbeats growing fainter as the watcher rode away. But Marcus had the distinct feeling the man wasn't leaving for good. He was leaving to tell someone else that the new owner had found exactly what they'd been hoping no one would ever find. Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon examining every inch of the cabin, but the sealed floor remained the most intriguing mystery. Whatever lay beneath had been important enough for someone to permanently close it off, yet not important enough to simply remove. As evening approached, he decided to ride back to town for supplies and answers. The general store was nearly empty when he arrived, but the moment he walked through the door, conversation stopped. The storekeeper, a thin man with nervous hands, barely met his eyes. "Need some tools," Marcus said, placing coins on the counter. "Hammer, pry bar, maybe some nails." The storekeeper's hands trembled as he gathered the items. "Fixing up a place?" "The cabin on Blackwood Ridge. Just bought it today." Every customer in the store turned to look at him. A woman near the fabric counter dropped her sewing basket, spilling thread across the floor. An elderly man by the window shook his head slowly, as if witnessing something tragic. "That'll be $2, the storekeeper whispered, pushing the tools across the counter without waiting for Marcus to inspect them. As Marcus gathered his purchases, the store's back door opened. A tall man with sharp features stepped inside, the same man he'd seen watching from the tree line. Up close, his silver-banded hat gleamed in the lamplight, and his coat bore the dust of a hard ride. "Vincent Hayes," the man introduced himself, extending a hand that Marcus noticed was calloused from years of gripping a gun. "Heard you made an interesting purchase today." News travels fast. Especially bad news. Vincent's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm here to make you an offer. $400 for that cabin, cash in hand tonight." The storekeeper dropped a jar of preserves. The crash echoed through the sudden silence like a gunshot. "That's quite a profit," Marcus said carefully. "Why would you pay so much for something nobody else wanted?" "Let's just say I have sentimental attachments to the place. Sentimental enough to watch it from the trees." Vincent's hand moved slightly closer to his hip. "I've been keeping an eye on that property for a long time, making sure nobody disturbs what should stay undisturbed, but now that someone owns it legally..." He pulled out a leather pouch heavy with coins. $400. Final offer." Marcus looked around the store. Every face reflected the same message. Take the money and leave. Whatever was under that cabin floor, the entire town knew about it, and they all agreed it should stay buried. But something in Vincent's desperation made Marcus suspicious. Men didn't offer 20 times what something cost unless they needed it badly, very badly. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus said, backing toward the door, "but I think I'll hold on to my investment." Vincent's expression darkened. "That would be unwise." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm trying to save your life." The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Every person in the store had gone perfectly still, as if waiting for something terrible to happen. But before Vincent could explain what he meant, the sound of multiple horses approaching fast made everyone freeze. Through the window, Marcus could see 3 riders dismounting in front of the store. They moved with purpose, their hands resting on their weapons. One of them looked directly at Marcus through the glass and nodded to Vincent. "Too late," Vincent whispered. "They know you've seen it." The 3 men who entered the store moved like they owned the place. The first one, tall and lean with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest, scanned the room before his eyes settled on Marcus. The second man was older, well-dressed, with the soft hands of someone who'd never done manual labor. The third kept his hand on his gun and positioned himself by the door. "Benjamin Cross," the well-dressed man announced, though he wasn't introducing himself to Marcus. He was looking at Vincent. "I thought we had an understanding about this situation." Vincent's jaw tightened. "I offered him fair money. He refused." "Fair money?" Benjamin laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You offered him enough to buy a small ranch. Don't you think that might make him curious about why?" Marcus realized he was watching a conversation that had been brewing for years. These men knew each other well, had probably discussed this exact scenario many times. The only variable was him. "Gentlemen," Marcus interrupted, "I don't know what's got you all so worked up about a rundown cabin, but you opened the floor yet?" Benjamin cut him off. The question hit like a physical blow. Every person in the store sucked in their breath at once. The storekeeper actually backed away from his own counter. "What floor?" Marcus asked, though he already knew. Benjamin stepped closer. "The sealed section. Don't pretend you didn't notice it. Everyone who's ever been in that cabin notices it. That's why nobody's lived there for 15 years. What's underneath? Papers, Benjamin said simply. Old papers that some people would prefer stayed buried. What kind of papers? The deputy spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly from years of tobacco. The kind that could hang a man or make him rich enough to disappear forever. Suddenly, the pieces began falling into place. The cabin hadn't been abandoned. It had been evacuated. Someone had sealed valuable or incriminating documents under the floor, then made sure nobody could legally claim the property until today. So the previous owner, Marcus said slowly. He hid something and then what? Died before he could retrieve it? Murdered, Elena Martinez said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see the old woman standing there, her shawl clutched tight around her shoulders. Thomas Caldwell was murdered 3 days after he sealed that floor, shot in the back while riding to town. Benjamin's face went white. Elena, you need to stop talking. No. Her voice was stronger than her frail appearance suggested. This man deserves to know what he's gotten himself into. Thomas Caldwell discovered something about the land deals in this county, something that involved very important people selling the same property to multiple buyers, pocketing the money, and disappearing. That's enough. The deputy moved toward Elena, but she continued talking faster. Thomas had proof. Names, dates, forged documents. He was going to expose the whole operation, but they got to him first. Those papers under that floor could destroy half the wealthy families in 3 counties. The store went dead silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He owned property that contained evidence of a massive fraud scheme, evidence that powerful people had killed to protect. Now you understand, Vincent said quietly, why I offered you $400 to walk away.
But before Marcus could respond, the deputy's hand moved to his gun. Too bad he knows too much now. We can't let him leave. The deputy's words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. But before he could draw his weapon, Elena Martinez stepped directly between him and Marcus. You'll have to shoot me first, Deputy Jackson, she said calmly. And I don't think you're prepared to murder an old woman in front of a store full of witnesses. Jackson's hand hesitated on his gun. He looked to Benjamin for direction, but the well-dressed man was staring at Marcus with calculating eyes. There might be another way, Benjamin said slowly. What if Mr. Rivera here became our partner instead of our problem? Vincent scoffed. You can't be serious. Think about it. He legally owns the property. He can retrieve those documents without breaking any laws. We split whatever Thomas Caldwell hid under there, and everyone walks away rich. Marcus felt the weight of every stare in the room. What makes you think there's money down there? Elena said it was evidence of fraud. Thomas Caldwell wasn't just collecting evidence, Benjamin explained. He was collecting payment from the people he was planning to expose. Extortion, some might call it. Others might call it justice. Either way, he had accumulated quite a fortune before someone decided to silence him permanently. How much money are we talking about? Enough to buy half the territory, the deputy answered. Maybe more. Marcus's mind raced. If what they were saying was true, the sealed floor didn't just contain evidence. It contained the profits from years of blackmail. Money that Thomas Caldwell had extracted from corrupt land dealers before they killed him for it. What's to stop you from shooting me the moment I hand over whatever's down there? Marcus asked. Because we need you alive, Benjamin replied. You're the only one with legal right to that property. Without you, we're just grave robbers. With you, we're business partners. Elna shook her head. Don't trust them, son. They killed Thomas. They'll kill you too. We didn't kill Thomas Caldwell, Jackson said. But we know who did. And if those documents see daylight, that person will kill anyone connected to them. The revelation hit like cold water. There was someone else involved, someone more dangerous than the men in this room, someone who had already committed murder and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Who killed Thomas? Marcus asked. The 3 men exchanged glances. None of them wanted to answer. Finally, Vincent spoke. Someone with enough power to make this whole town forget it ever happened. Someone who's been watching that cabin for 15 years, waiting for the day someone would be foolish enough to buy it. Someone who probably already knows about your purchase. The auction was public record, Benjamin added. By tomorrow, half the territory will know that cabin has a new owner. Jackson moved away from his gun. Which means you have tonight, maybe less. Once word spreads, they'll come for you. Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. He'd bought what he thought was a bargain property, and instead had inherited a death sentence. The documents under that floor were worth killing for, and someone had already proven they were willing to do exactly that. So what's it going to be? Benjamin asked. Partner with us and live rich? Or try to handle this alone and end up like Thomas Caldwell? But before Marcus could answer, a new voice spoke from the store's front window. I'm afraid none of you will be living to see tomorrow. Everyone turned to see a figure silhouetted against the evening light, a rifle pointed directly at them through the glass. The killer had found them. The figure in the window stepped through the door with practiced calm, rifle steady in his hands. He was older than expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and expensive clothes that marked him as wealthy. But his eyes held the cold certainty of someone who'd killed before and felt no remorse about it. Judge Richard Stone, Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus felt his stomach drop. A judge? No wonder the entire town had been too terrified to speak. This wasn't just about money. It was about the most powerful man in the territory protecting his secrets. Hello, Elena, Stone said pleasantly, as if greeting an old friend. I was hoping I wouldn't have to see you again. You murdered Thomas Caldwell, she accused. Thomas Caldwell was a blackmailer and a thief. I simply administered justice outside the courtroom. Stone's rifle never wavered as he looked around the store. Though I admit his timing was inconvenient, he sealed those documents before I could retrieve them. Benjamin raised his hand slowly. Judge, we can work this out. Nobody here wants trouble. Trouble? Stone laughed. Mr. Cross, you've been selling worthless land claims to desperate families for 15 years, using my forged signatures on fake deeds. You've stolen thousands of dollars from people who trusted the law. I'd say trouble found you a long time ago. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Judge Stone hadn't just been covering up the land fraud, he'd been orchestrating it. His signature gave legitimacy to fake documents that Benjamin and others used to swindle settlers. Thomas Caldwell had discovered the scheme and tried to blackmail the judge, only to be murdered for his efforts.
What about the money? Vincent asked desperately. Thomas collected payments from all of us. That's worth more than revenge. Thomas Caldwell collected $43,000 over 2 years, Stone said matter-of-factly. Money that rightfully belongs to the families you cheated. I intend to return every penny to its proper owners. Jackson laughed bitterly. Noble of you, Judge. Except you'll be dead within a week once word gets out about what you've done. Word won't get out, Stone replied calmly, because none of you will be alive to spread it. But even as he spoke, Marcus noticed something crucial. The judge's hands weren't as steady as they'd first appeared. His left hand was shaking slightly, and there was perspiration on his forehead despite the cool evening air. This wasn't a cold-blooded killer. This was a desperate man trying to clean up a mess that had spiraled beyond his control. You don't want to do this, Marcus said quietly. Murdering 6 people in a public store won't solve your problems. It'll just create bigger ones. 5 people, Stone corrected. You're going to help me retrieve those documents from your cabin, then you're going to disappear with enough money to start over somewhere far away. And if I refuse? Then you'll join Thomas Caldwell in the ground. Elena stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. Richard Stone, I've known you since you were a boy stealing apples from my orchard. Your father would be ashamed of what you've become. Something flickered across Stone's face. Pain, maybe, or regret. My father never had to choose between his reputation and his survival, Elena. Times were simpler then. Times were honest then. The judge's rifle lowered slightly, just for a moment, but it was enough. Jackson lunged forward, tackling Stone to the ground as the weapon discharged harmlessly into the ceiling. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and suddenly everyone was moving at once. But in the chaos, Marcus realized the most important thing of all. He was now the only person who could legally access those documents, and everyone in this room, including the judge, needed him alive to get them. Jackson and Judge Stone rolled across the floor, fighting for control of the rifle. The deputy was younger and stronger, but Stone fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. Vincent dove for his own gun while Benjamin scrambled toward the back door. "Stop!" Marcus shouted, pulling his own pistol. The authority in his voice made everyone freeze. "All of you, stop moving!" Jackson had managed to pin Stone to the ground, the rifle now several feet away. Both men were breathing hard, staring at Marcus's weapon. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his mind working fast. "We're all going to that cabin together. We're going to open that floor, and we're going to see exactly what Thomas Caldwell died protecting." "That's suicide," Vincent gasped. "Soon as we open it, he'll kill us all." He nodded toward Stone. "No," Marcus replied, "because the judge needs something from those documents that's more important than revenge. Don't you, Judge?" Stone's eyes narrowed, but he didn't deny it. "What's down there besides money?" Marcus pressed. "What's so important that you've spent 15 years making sure nobody could get to it?" Stone remained silent, but Elena spoke from behind the counter where she'd taken cover. "Letters," she said quietly. "Thomas told me before he died. Judge Stone wasn't just signing fake land deeds. He was taking orders from someone higher up, someone in the territorial government who was orchestrating the whole operation." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Judge Stone wasn't the mastermind. He was just another player in a scheme that reached all the way to the territorial capital. "That's why you can't just destroy the evidence," Marcus realized. "Those letters prove you were following orders, not giving them. Without them, you take the blame for everything." Stone's shoulders sagged in defeat. "The territorial governor has been stealing federal land grants for 5 years, selling the same parcels to multiple buyers, pocketing the profits, and using local judges to make it legal. I thought I was serving justice. I was just serving greed." So Thomas had proof of the governor's involvement. Letters with his seal, orders with his signature, payment records showing exactly how much money he made from each fraudulent sale. Stone struggled to sit up. Thomas was going to expose all of us. Me, Benjamin, the governor, everyone involved. But he wanted to be paid for his silence first. Jackson laughed bitterly. "So you killed him to protect a governor who would have thrown you to the wolves anyway." "I killed him because I was stupid enough to believe I could contain the damage. Now I know better." Stone looked directly at Marcus. "That cabin contains enough evidence to hang half the territorial government. It's also the only thing that might keep me from hanging with them." Marcus felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. He wasn't just dealing with local corruption anymore. He was caught in the middle of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government, and everyone involved, from the judge to the governor, would kill to keep their secrets buried. "So we go to the cabin," Marcus decided. "All of us together. We retrieve the evidence, and then we decide what to do with it." "What makes you think we can trust each other long enough to get there?" Vincent asked. "Because right now we're all dead if we don't work together." Marcus holstered his gun and extended his hand to help Stone to his feet. "The governor knows I bought that property by now. He'll send men to eliminate me and retrieve those documents. Our only chance is to get there first." As if summoned by his words, the sound of multiple horses approaching fast echoed through the evening air. Through the window they could see riders surrounding the store. "Too late," Benjamin whispered. But Marcus was already moving toward the back door. "Elena, is there another way out of town?" "The old mining trail," she said. "But it's dangerous in the dark." "More dangerous than staying here?" The sound of boots on the front porch answered that question. They had seconds before the governor's men broke down the door. They burst through the store's back door just as the front window shattered under gunfire. 6 of them, Marcus, Judge Stone, Vincent, Jackson, Benjamin, and Elena, stumbling into the alley where their horses waited. Behind them, angry voices shouted orders as the governor's men realized their targets had escaped. "The mining trail's a mile north," Elena gasped, struggling to mount her horse. "But it hasn't been used in years, could be washed out." Better than facing a firing squad, Marcus replied, helping her up before swinging onto his own mount. They rode hard through the darkness, the sound of pursuit growing closer with each passing minute. The old mining trail was barely visible in the moonlight, winding treacherously between rocky outcroppings and loose shale that threatened to send them tumbling into the canyon below. Judge Stone's horse stumbled, nearly throwing him, but he managed to stay in the saddle. "How much farther?" he called out. "Another half-mile," Elena answered. "Trail comes out near the back of your property, Marcus." The irony wasn't lost on him. They were risking their lives to reach the very place that had started all this trouble. But now he understood why that cabin had been worth 20 cents and why nobody else had bid. Everyone knew what was hidden there. They just hadn't known how dangerous it would be to possess it. They reached the cabin as the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon. No time to rest. The governor's men would find the trail soon enough. Marcus kicked open the door and immediately went to the sealed section of floor, pulling out the pry bar he'd bought at the general store. 15 years, Vincent muttered, watching as Marcus worked to break the seal. 15 years that floor's been closed. The dark substance that had held the boards in place cracked and split under pressure from the bar. One by one, the planks came loose, revealing a cavity underneath that had been carefully constructed to hide its contents. Inside was a metal strongbox and a leather satchel. Marcus lifted them both out, his hands shaking slightly as he realized he was holding the evidence that had cost Thomas Caldwell his life. The strongbox was heavy with coins, more money than Marcus had ever seen in one place. But it was the leather satchel that made Judge Stone's face go white. Inside were dozens of letters bearing the territorial governor's official seal, detailed payment records, and copies of fraudulent land deeds that showed the scope of the conspiracy. "Dear God," Benjamin whispered, reading over Marcus's shoulder. "He sold the same parcels 15, 20 times each. Families in 3 territories think they own land that legally belongs to someone else." Jackson found a letter dated just 2 weeks before Thomas's death. "Listen to this. Judge Stone, the Caldwell situation has become untenable. Eliminate the problem by any means necessary. Our mutual friend will compensate you appropriately for your service." It's signed by Governor Daniel Pierce himself. "He ordered you to commit murder," Elena said, staring at Stone in shock. Stone nodded slowly. "I thought I was protecting the law. I was just protecting a criminal who saw me as expendable." But their discovery was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching fast. Through the cabin's grimy windows, they could see at least 8 riders surrounding the building. The governor's men had found them. "Throw out your weapons and come out with your hands raised," a voice called from outside. "You have 1 minute to comply." Marcus looked at the evidence scattered around him, then at the faces of his unlikely companions. They had what they'd come for, but now they needed to survive long enough to use it. "We need to make them an offer they can't refuse," he said, gathering the most incriminating letters. "Because this evidence doesn't just implicate the governor. It names every corrupt official in the territory, including some of the men outside." Judge Stone understood immediately. "You want to turn them against their own boss. I want to give them a choice. Help us expose the real criminals or go down with them." The question was whether desperate men with guns would choose justice over loyalty to a corrupt governor who had already proven he'd sacrifice anyone to protect himself. Marcus stepped onto the cabin's front porch, holding the leather satchel high above his head where everyone could see it. The 8 mounted men had their rifles trained on him, but he noticed something crucial. They weren't wearing official badges. These were hired guns, not lawmen. "Before you pull those triggers," Marcus called out, "you might want to know what's in this bag." The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, spat in the dirt. "We know what's in there. That's why we're here. Do you know your names are in here too?" Marcus pulled out a sheet of paper. "Payment records showing how much Governor Pierce paid each of you to keep quiet about his land scheme. Seems he's been very generous with stolen money." Several of the riders shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. The leader's confidence wavered slightly. "You're lying. Governor Daniel Pierce has been planning to eliminate all witnesses for months," Marcus continued, reading from one of the governor's letters, "including the men he hired to do his dirty work. Says here, he considers you all loose ends that need to be tied up." Judge Stone appeared in the doorway behind Marcus. "It's true. I've seen the orders. Once you eliminate us, there are more men coming to eliminate you. Pierce can't afford to leave anyone alive who knows about his crimes. The hired guns exchanged nervous glances. They'd been betrayed by employers before, but never by someone with the power to have them legally hanged. "What are you proposing?" the leader asked. "Help us get this evidence to the territorial marshal in the capital," Marcus said. "Pierce goes to prison, and you testify against him in exchange for immunity, or keep following his orders and end up dead by sunset." It took less than 30 seconds for them to make their choice. The leader lowered his rifle and dismounted. "What do you need?" 3 days later, Marcus stood in the territorial marshal's office in the capital, watching as Governor Daniel Pierce was led away in shackles. The evidence from Thomas Caldwell's cache had been overwhelming. Hundreds of forged documents, payment records showing Pierce had stolen over $200,000 in federal land grants, and letters proving he'd ordered multiple murders to cover his tracks. Judge Stone had been arrested too, but his cooperation and the letters proving he'd been following orders earned him a reduced sentence. Vincent, Jackson, and Benjamin faced various charges, but their testimony helped convict dozens of other corrupt officials throughout the territory.
Elena Martinez had returned to her home with enough money from the strongbox to live comfortably for the rest of her life. Marcus's way of thanking her for her courage in speaking the truth. As for Marcus himself, he'd kept the cabin and used his reward money from the territorial government to turn it into a legitimate ranch. The 12 acres that had cost him 20 cents became the foundation for one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. But more importantly, he'd learned something about himself that changed everything. Standing up to corrupt men with guns had been terrifying, but it had also been the right thing to do. Thomas Caldwell had died trying to expose the truth, and his death had almost been meaningless. Instead, his evidence had brought down the most corrupt administration in territorial history and returned stolen land to hundreds of families who'd been cheated. The cabin still stood on Marcus's property, but now it housed legitimate documents, land deeds, cattle records, and legal papers that would never need to be hidden. The sealed floor had been replaced with honest oak planks, and the windows had been cleaned to let in the light. Sometimes late at night, Marcus would sit in that cabin and think about the strange chain of events that had started with a 20-cent bid at a public auction. He'd bought what he thought was just property, but he'd actually purchased the key to justice for hundreds of families and redemption for himself. The 20 cents had been the best investment he'd ever made. Not because of the land or the money, but because it had shown him the man he was capable of becoming when the stakes were high enough and the cause was just enough. He was no longer just Marcus Rivera, small-time businessman. He was Marcus Rivera, rancher, and the man who'd helped bring down the most corrupt governor in territorial history.
And that was worth far more than any amount of hidden gold could ever be. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the American frontier. If you enjoyed this story of courage, corruption, and justice, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales from the Wild West. Your support means everything to us and helps bring you these captivating stories every week.